everybody, thanks for tuning in. Today I will be covering the tactical combat for the Great War at Sea series using Pacific Crossroads. So for this I have all the pieces here. I also have some stuff in the background. Printed off stat sheets for Japanese ships and the American ships involved. Not exactly my greatest work. I also got all the stuff here, my dice and all the counters required for a scenario that I'm going to use to show off the combat. Speaking of that, the scenario we're using today is called Fast Cruisers. This is basically this is the first scenario, and it's going to be basic combat between fast ships from the Japanese and American forces. So, here's how the setup works. The Central Powers player sets up first in the central shaded hexes per Rule 7.23. Basically, that means the Japanese player will set up in these shaded hexes right here. They will set up in, I think, what was it? These rules get very confusing because they're so poorly explained, which is why I'm doing this. They must be set up in one or two adjacent shaded center hexes. So these ships can be set up in one or two of these. And since there's only 8 ships. Alright, let me explain the forces we got here. For the Japanese side, we have 3 light cruisers, 2 gunboats, and 8 destroyers. For the Allied American forces, we have 3 scout cruisers and 10 Cassin-class destroyers. Each of these ships are named, and each of the light cruisers and scout cruisers are on the long ship pieces, while the destroyers are in the small ship pieces. These are multi-warship pieces, which essentially means each of these represents several ships, but for the purposes of a setup, they count as one ship. These essentially represent squadrons. So today we'll have Cassin 4 here representing one ship. We'll have Momo 1 representing the 3 Momos. What is this called? Isokazi 1 representing a full squadron of 3 destroyers, and Isokazi 2 representing the other 2 in the setup. So I will show off an example setup. So the American forces set up in the northwestern side. So I'm going to be going north up here. So northwestern would be over here. These numbered hexes right here is the northwestern side. And this is the center. Now this is a night scenario. So spotting range. Well, I'll get into spotting range after setup. So what I'll do is I'll have light cruisers set up together. Space 6. And I'll have... Now, it doesn't really matter if I keep it up or not, but... Well, let me just show you something. If I was setting up... Why did I move these? Let's say, for the Japanese ships, if I was playing with another person, see this? The Hirado light cruiser CL-23. Normally, I'd set it up like this. This will keep the player guessing at what it is. Of course, they know it's going to be a light cruiser because that's the only long ship piece for the Japanese. But they won't know which one, which doesn't really matter because their stats are the same. And once again, spotting range. So since this is a night game, it's going to be a spotting range of 2 hexes. So if I moved over here, these ships, 1, 2, would be able to spot this. So this would be flipped up, and it would reveal the Hirado. Now, this would be more important in other games where you could see like battleships or armored cruisers or stuff like that. So I'm going to do something similar for the Japanese. Now, I'm not really going to be going into that because I'm playing this solitaire. I don't have another person, so I'll be setting up the Japanese over here. And I'll set up their destroyers and gunboats. Doesn't really matter that I set them up stacked, but set them up right here. Have the American destroyers do something similar, and I'll set them up next to the light cruisers. If I can ever get the stack. There we go. Now that's done, the American forces have initiative on the first turn. The game follows an impulse sequence for each round. This is the sequence sheet. You could download this at avalanchepress.com under A Great War at Sea. Print it out. It's a lot more useful than referring to the rulebook. So it says determine which player has the initiative. We already know that. That really only matters for subsequent rounds. So for the first, initiative player moves all ships with a speed of 2+. We have none of those. Both players will conduct gunnery combat and torpedo combat. This is simultaneous, so the initiative player would roll first and stuff, but the damage doesn't count until the next, impulse. So we do gunnery. So let's say the Yahagi and what is this? The Davao or Davao go have a fight. The Davao takes like some hull damage, maybe. And the Yahagi, let's say the Davao takes some hull damage and loses a tertiary gun. Well, when it's able to fire, it'll still roll all 4 dice into gunnery combat and still be able to do damage against the Yahagi, but after that, then it'll count as losing the tertiary hull armament. I'll move that back there. So yes, simultaneous, same thing goes with torpedo combat. Torpedo combat can be a lot more devastating, but it's a lot harder to hit stuff. So we'll move on. Player without initiative moves all his groups at speed of 2+. We don't do that. Now, speed in this game, each ship in this group, basically each ship for each faction has a speed of 2. Well, what does speed mean? Does that mean they get to move 2 hexes? No, each ship can move 1 hex in an impulse during their sequence. So since they're not in gunnery combat, I'll just go to the player without initiative moves his groups with a speed of 2. So all these ships have a speed of 2, and that means they get to act faster than ships with a speed of 1 or 1 slow. So while this player with a speed of 2+ will be able to move faster than everybody else, so that's really what speed means. I think it's different in operational. I'll get into that in that video. So, I'll have these guys move 1 closer to the Americans. Same with the destroyers. Now that they're there, they can conduct gunnery combat. Since this is a night game, they are at a max range of 2 for all their weapons, except tertiary weapons, which have a max range of 1. And so, 1 and 2, they can't hit anything. Now for torpedoes, torpedo combat would be conducted in the same hex, I believe. Oh god, I forgot about how terrible these rules. Rules of advice, do not use the basic gunnery combat rules. They suck and don't really tell you anything. Why? Why not? So, torpedo combat in this game is conducted at either the adjacent hex or the same hex. So it's very close range, which means fast ships are good at it. Well, somewhat. And moving on. So it'd be both players would conduct, and now the player without initiative moves all his groups. Actually, I should have moved the Americans first. So I'll move them right there, and I'll just have the Japanese fire first, since they were supposed to. So there are a range of 2. Secondary guns, primary guns have a range of 3 hexes. Secondaries, range of 2, and tertiaries, range of 1. Because they are small caliber guns used to mainly kill destroyers that are trying to get up on them and fire torpedoes. So American ships cannot actually fire because all of their ships use tertiary guns. Now I'm just gonna check that real quick, just in case I'm wrong. I don't want to give you guys any wrong information. Yeah, that's right. All right. So, let me just check. Yep, all tertiary guns. Yeah. None of them have secondary guns, but they do have a bunch of tertiaries, and they actually have light armored hulls. Meaning that tertiary guns won't be able to damage their hull. So, when the Japanese player would move, the Japanese player will be able to shoot with his secondary guns from his light cruisers. So I'll just put them in a little bit of a formation here. And roll separately for each cruiser. Now in this game, because it's night, I think. Let me check it. I'm sorry if it's being a little slow. I have a tendency to forget things. No, night doesn't actually matter for... Okay, that's actually kind of weird. Alright. Okay, that's really weird. Anyway. So, gonna roll for each of the gunnery factors. So we're gonna roll for this ship first. Damn it. Hate it when it does that. But we rolled a 6, which is a hit. 6s are hits in this game. Do not use basic gunnery combat because that one sucks. But you are able to get 5s. So, rolling that against the Deval. I'm actually gonna bring out those ships. I should have stated that before, but I have a tendency to forget things. So, 6, which means you roll 2 dice on the gunnery damage table. Which I'll just have showing up here. Might be a bit hard to see. Sorry about that. The camera's not of exceptional quality. So we're going to roll on the gunnery damage table. Rolled an 8, an 8. I can't see. An 8 is tertiary. Which means the Deval would suffer a hit on its tertiary weapons, and since it's secondary and the Deval has no armor on its tertiary weapons, it would lose one of its tertiary guns. And that is why you need stat sheets, so that you can X out the stuff and keep track of it. Now, the white boxes mean they have no armor, and the diagonal lines on the boxes mean they have light armor, which means that tertiaries can't pen it, but secondaries and primaries can. So, the Deval has taken some damage and has lost a bit of its firepower, but considering the Japanese ships, they actually do have light armor, so that can be a bit difficult. And I hate having this clogged up throat. So, we're going to be moving to the next piece of the impulse, which would be conducting torpedo combat, but since none of the ships are adjacent to each other yet. So, the initiative player would move with all its groups with its speed, basically all these groups. So I will move in a very risky thing that I probably wouldn't do in reality. But considering all their guns are there, move them up there, and I'll move these ships up here. I'm going to try and take out their light cruisers, since that seems to be their main source of firepower. Well, at least the Americans would. That's what I'd do. So, both players conduct gunnery combat. So the initiative player moves and both players conduct gunnery combat. So, I will roll for the Americans first, and I'll use these dice. All these dice came in the game, by the way. Why one's blue instead of purple? It's not. I had no clue. Gonna be conducting gunnery combat with each of the ships. So for the Manila, I'll target whatever that one is, the Shikama, I think. Shikuma. And I'll roll for each of these. And I scored no hits. Very unfortunate. Actually, let me see if I had any modifiers. Well, yes, I do. I get a +1 for firing into the same or adjacent hex. I frequently forget these things. So these two will count as hits. So very nice for me to notice. So I'll roll for the first one. Rolling for the first hit. I scored a 9.